Let's be honest about something most people won't say out loud. When a woman chooses to live alone, without a man, the world doesn't always know what to do with her. Society often views her through a lens of suspicion, pity, or misplaced concern. Is she okay? They ask. What happened? They whisper. But here's the truth they miss completely. A woman who lives alone is not lonely. She's liberated. And that liberation is one of the most misunderstood, yet powerful, states of being. See, solitude is not the same as isolation. There's a difference between being alone and being abandoned. One is a choice, the other is a wound. A woman who chooses to live alone is making a statement, not just about her relationship status, but about her values, her identity, and her power. She's not avoiding love. She's choosing presence over performance, stillness over chaos, and depth over distraction. Most people are never taught how to be alone. We live in a culture that teaches us from a young age that our worth is tied to our relationships, who we're dating, who we marry, for kindness, who approves of us. Women in particular are conditioned to feel like they need someone next to them to justify their existence. That's not connection. That's dependency disguised as love. And when one woman breaks free from that narrative, something radical begins to happen. She starts to hear her own voice again. Living alone creates the conditions for inner clarity. Without the constant noise of another person's expectations or the emotional labor of managing someone else's moods, she starts to understand what she actually wants, what brings her peace, what triggers her anxiety, what fills her cup. She wakes up in the morning and chooses her own rhythm. She isn't rushing to make space for someone else's priorities. She becomes fluent in her own needs. And here's the deeper truth: in emotional freedom often begins with physical space. That space, a room, an apartment, a home she calls her own, isn't just shelter. It's a sanctuary, a place where she can expand, think, grieve, heal, create, laugh out loud at her own jokes, dance in the kitchen at midnight, cry when she needs to cry without explaining why. It's in these moments of aloneness that self-trust is built. Not because life is perfect, but because she's showing herself that she can handle it. And let's not confuse solitude with avoidance. This isn't about shutting out the world or refusing love. It's about creating the space to receive the right kind of love, the kind that doesn't come with conditions, control, or compromise of self. A woman who lives alone is often the woman who finally stopped settling. She's not interested in filling a void with a body. She's interested in filling her life with meaning. And that changes everything. Psychologically, this stage is essential. Carl Jung spoke of the process of individuation, the journey of becoming whole within oneself. That journey doesn't happen in a crowded room. It happens in silence. In choosing solitude, a woman enters into that sacred space of confronting herself, not as the world sees her, not as her past defined her, but as she actually is, stripped of roles and responsibilities imposed by others. That's not weakness. That's spiritual strength, and sure will be moments of doubt. Days when the silence feels heavy, when she misses the idea of someone, even if that someone never saw her fully. That's part of the process. Growth isn't always loud and visible. It's often quiet and internal. But over time, she realizes she hasn't just learned to live alone. She's learned to live deeply, intentionally, authentically. The irony is, once she becomes at peace with her solitude, she becomes the most powerful version of herself. Not because she's closed off, but because she's finally whole. And from that wholeness, everything she attracts changes. Relationships become healthier, boundaries become stronger, her time becomes sacred, and suddenly, what used to feel like lack now feels like luxury. The luxury of peace, clarity, and self-respect. So no, she's not lonely, she's living. living on her own terms, living without needing to be needed, living in full possession of her own voice and values. And once she's tasted that kind of freedom, she'll never again settle for anything less than alignment. She doesn't need a man to complete her. She needed space to meet herself. That's the truth the world doesn't often tell, but she knows it now, and once a woman knows who she is in silence, no one, not a partner, not society, not even her own fear, can take that away from her. Because the woman who lives alone isn't empty. She's full of herself in the best possible way. Here's the thing. Emotional security isn't something another person gives you. It's something you build within yourself. And a woman who lives alone, without the emotional buffer of a partner, learns that truth the hard way. But in the most transformative way, she learns to be her own anchor, her own calm in the storm, her own reassurance on the hard days. We often mistake partnership for stability, for kindness. We think having someone there means we're safe. But emotional safety that's dependent on someone else's presence is fragile. It shifts when they shift. It breaks when they leave. True security, the kind that can't be taken away, is internal. It's cultivated through experience, reflection, and conscious choice. And when a woman lives alone, she begins to build that emotional fortress brick by brick. At first, it can feel jarring. There's no one there to debrief with after a tough day. No one to offer that instant comfort when life throws a curveball. But in that void, something begins to emerge in her capacity to hold space for herself. Instead of immediately reaching outward, she starts turning inward. She listens to her thoughts. She watches her own reactions. And most importantly, she stops outsourcing her emotional regulation to someone else. This is a powerful shift, because when you stop needing someone else to calm you, validate you, or reassure you, you gain power. Not power over others, but power over yourself, emotional maturity. And that's rare. Most people never get there because they never give themselves the chance. They're always in relationships, always leaning, always filling silence with someone else's noise. But when you strip all of that away, what's left is the raw, honest work of self-containment. That doesn't mean you become cold or distant. It means you develop emotional integrity. You know what you feel and why you feel it. You don't project your pain onto others. You don't make your wounds someone else's responsibility. And you don't let someone's temporary affection determine your long-term peace. In this space of solitude, a woman begins to practice self-validation. That's not just a buzzword. It's a core psychological function. Self-validation is the ability to say to yourself, what I feel is real, what I need matters. I am allowed to take up space, even if no one is here to see it. And let me tell you, once she starts affirming herself like that, the world can no longer manipulate her with fear, guilt, or shame. This isn't easy, because most of us are conditioned to tie our emotional worth to our relationships. If someone's happy with us, we feel good. If someone's upset, we feel like we did something wrong. A woman who lives alone begins to unlearn all of that. For kindness, she starts to recognize that someone else's mood isn't her responsibility, that someone leaving doesn't mean she's unworthy. That absence isn't abandonment, it's sometimes protection. Philosophically, this is the beginning of what Viktor Frankl called existential responsibility. When you are alone, you realize no one is coming to live your life for you. No one else can carry the weight of your healing, your choices, or your destiny. That realization can be terrifying, but it's also incredibly freeing, because once you own your emotional world, you stop waiting for someone to rescue you from it. And here's the thing. When she finally stops needing rescue, she becomes someone others can't control. Not because she's guarded, but because she's grounded. She's no longer swayed by love bombing, no longer broken by ghosting, no longer craving constant reassurance. She trusts herself, and that self-trust becomes her compass. Now, when love shows up, it's no longer about filling a gap. It's about enhancing a life that's already full. She can receive love without losing herself in it. She can give love without betraying her own needs. That's what emotional security creates. The ability to connect deeply without clinging desperately. And that changes everything. You see, the woman who lives alone and learns to hold her own heart is no longer afraid of being alone again. She doesn't stay in toxic relationships just to avoid solitude. She doesn't tolerate emotional crumbs just to feel wanted. Her self-worth doesn't fluctuate with someone else's attention. She's stable within herself. And let's be honest, this kind of emotional independence makes her rare, not hard to love, but hard to manipulate. And that distinction matters. Because when you know your own value, you stop bargaining with it. You stop pleading to be seen. You stop performing for love. You just are. Grounded. Whole. So the next time someone wonders why she lives alone or pities her for it, they should understand what that space has created. It didn't make her hard, it made her whole. It didn't isolate her, it illuminated her. And what she found in that solitude wasn't emptiness, it was strength. There's a strange phenomenon that happens when a woman chooses to live alone. Suddenly, everyone around her becomes an expert on her life. They start projecting their assumptions, their fears, their expectations. Society doesn't quite know what to do with a woman who isn't orbiting around a man. And so, it labels her too picky, too difficult, too ambitious, too much. Or the classic, she'll regret it. But here's what those labels are really saying. She's not playing the role we expected her to play. Because a woman who chooses solitude, who isn't defined by partnership or male validation, disrupts a centuries-old script. That script says women are meant to be chosen, to wait, to adapt, to serve, but when she chooses herself, fully and unapologetically, she doesn't just break the script, she rewrites it. And that makes people uncomfortable. Let's talk about what's really going on beneath these labels. Most of them are rooted in projection. When someone calls a woman intimidating, what they often mean is, she can't be controlled. When they say she's too independent, what they're really saying is, she won't tolerate emotional laziness. These aren't flaws. These are boundaries misread by people who aren't used to a woman having any. And here's the deeper truth. These labels aren't about the woman. They're about the insecurities of the person speaking. See, it's easier to diminish what we don't understand than to confront the ways we've been conditioned. It's easier to say, she's bitter, than to ask, well, why does her clarity make me uncomfortable? It's easier to reduce her autonomy to arrogance than to admit that maybe she's just evolved past needing permission to live fully. This is what happens when a woman reclaims her life on her own terms. She becomes mirror-like. She reflects back to others the parts of themselves they've ignored or denied. Her peace exposes their restlessness. Her standards reveal their compromises. Her wholeness makes their codependency visible. And not everyone is ready to face that. But the woman who lives alone, who's done the work of being with herself, sitting in her own silence, confronting her own patterns, she no longer fears being misunderstood. That fear dies when you realize your identity doesn't depend on being explained or accepted. She's not here to be digestible. She's here to be real, and make no mistake, this takes strength, because the pressure to conform is relentless. From family, from culture, from peers who mean well but don't understand. There's this underlying message that being single past a certain age means something's wrong. That choosing independence is a failure to settle down. But what if she doesn't want to settle? What if she wants to rise? Choosing using yourself in a world that tells you to shrink is one of the most radical things a woman can do. It's not about rejecting love. It's about rejecting versions of love that require her to abandon herself. It's about saying, if being loved means losing my voice, I'd rather be alone. And that kind of self-respect isn't arrogance. It's wisdom. Philosophically, what we're talking about is the shift from external identity to internal sovereignty. When you stop basing your value on how others perceive you, you reclaim authorship of your own story. You stop being a character in someone else's narrative and become the narrator of your own. That's agency. That's empowerment. And, practically, it means she no longer entertains relationships that drain her. She no longer bends just to keep the peace. She no longer stays in rooms where she has to shrink to be accepted. She knows now peace is better than attention. Truth is better than validation. Solitude is better than self-betrayal. And once she knows that, she's immune to manipulation. The labels stop sticking because she sees them for what they are. Projections, not reflections. She doesn't internalize society's discomfort anymore. She understands that being misunderstood is often the tax you pay for being authentic. And that authenticity, it's her power. Because the woman who lives alone isn't hiding. She's choosing. Choosing to live deliberately. Choosing to be seen clearly. Choosing to protect her energy, her time, her emotional landscape. She no longer wears labels that don't belong to her. She's not too much. She's not too little. She's enough. Exactly as she is. So when the world tries to define her, she doesn't fight it. She just keeps building, living, expanding. Because the truth is, she doesn't need the world to understand her. She just needs to understand herself. And once she does, everything changes. Because a woman who knows who she is and refuses to be reduced is the kind of woman who quietly changes everything around her. There's something profoundly transformative about a woman living alone, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically. One of the most powerful outcomes of that solitude is this Jesus. She learns the art of boundaries, and not just the surface-level kind, like blocking a number or declining an invitation, but the deep, internal boundaries. The kind that protect her energy, preserve her peace, and define her identity. When a woman lives alone, she starts to see what life feels like when no one is constantly taking from her. She begins to notice how her body relaxes in the absence of tension, how her thoughts settle when they don't have to accommodate someone else's chaos. In that quiet, she gets clear on one of the most vital truths. Her peace is not up for negotiation. Here's the thing. Many women are never taught how to have boundaries. They're taught how to be agreeable, how to accommodate, how to smile even when they're exhausted, how to make others comfortable, even at the expense of themselves. And when that's all you've ever known, boundaries can feel like rejection. They can feel selfish, harsh, unloving. But living alone changes that. It rewires her understanding of what boundaries truly are. You pause. She realizes they're not about keeping people out. They're about keeping herself intact. Boundaries are the structure within which self-respect lives. Without them, she was constantly overextended, always giving, always pleasing, always trying to earn space in rooms where she was never truly seen. In solitude, all of that falls away. There's no one else to manage, no emotional firefighting, no unspoken obligations. It's just her and the mirror. And that mirror doesn't lie. She starts to see how often she used to betray herself. Agreeing when she meant no, staying when she should have walked away, explaining herself just to avoid being misunderstood, and she makes a quiet decision: never again. She learns how to say no, not out of anger or defensiveness, but out of alignment. You create space for kindness, because when you're clear on your values, on what you will and won't allow, you don't need to justify your boundaries. You simply live them, and people either adjust or they exit. Either way, you remain whole. And here's the deeper layering. Boundaries aren't just about others. They're also about the self. Living alone, a woman learns how to set boundaries with her own patterns. She notices when she's spiraling into old habits, overthinking, overgiving, overexplaining. She catches herself when she's about to entertain someone who doesn't match her energy. She becomes her own guardian, her own filter, her own emotional gatekeeper. Psychologically, this is a sign of high self-awareness. When you can observe your own behavior, pause, and choose differently. That's emotional intelligence at work, and it doesn't happen by accident. It's developed through time, space, and the willingness to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it through codependency. Boundaries also give birth to something deeper, discernment. She no longer lets people close just because they're familiar, charming, or persistent. She reads energy now. She watches actions. She pays attention to how she feels after spending time with someone. Does she feel seen, or does she feel used? Does she feel energized, or does she feel drained? That level of self-check-in becomes her compass. It guides who gets access and who gets dismissed without guilt. She understands that not everyone deserves proximity, that access to her life is a privilege, not a right. And when someone crosses a line, she doesn't second-guess herself anymore. She doesn't apologize for choosing herself. She simply enforces the boundary and moves on. That's not cruelty. That's maturity, honest. This boundary work doesn't just protect her peace. It elevates her entire life. Because when your boundaries are strong, your standards rise. You stop settling for the bare minimum. You stop romanticizing red flags. You stop participating in dynamics that leave you empty. You become selective. Not because you're bitter, but because you're healed. And the people who come into your life now, they feel the difference. You're not performing. You're not proving. You're not persuading anyone to stay. You're just being fully, honestly, authentically, for kindness. And those who are aligned with that frequency will meet you there without you having to chase, beg, or bend. That's the beauty of boundaries. They don't just protect you from harm. They protect you from becoming someone you're not. So no, she's not lonely. She's not guarded. She's not cold. She's clear on what she needs, clear on what she won't tolerate, clear on the life she's building. You create space for kindness, one boundary at a time, and that clarity, that's what makes her dangerous in the best possible way. Because once a woman stops negotiating her peace, she becomes unstoppable.